Hello everyone, it's Jabbar here. Today's video is a patron request. If you'd like to make a video request of your own, you could do so by becoming a patron. The link to this can be found below. Islam is a religion with undeniable origins on the Arabian Peninsula. Its roots in the region are so strong that to present, the words Islam and Muslim are often, and incorrectly, used interchangeably when referring to the peoples of Arabic or Middle Eastern origin, despite the fact that not all Arabs or Middle Eastern peoples are Muslims. And also despite the fact that the largest population of Muslims actually reside in South Asia. In fact, 1 in 3 Muslims in the entire world have South Asian origins, primarily from India and Indonesia. Islam as a religion started in the holy city of Mecca. Born in the year 570 CE, Arabic prophet Muhammad is said to have started having visions from Allah at the age of 40. In 611 CE, while resting in a cave, he was allegedly given instructions on how to purify religion by a mysterious voice whom he believed to be the Almighty. These visions formed the basis of the Quran, and after being expelled from Mecca, he moved into the city of Medina, where he began teaching the religion to its denizens. Within just 2 decades, nearly the entire Arabian Peninsula had converted to Islam. After Muhammad's death in 632 CE, Islam began spreading well outside of Arabia through a combination of trade and warfare. By 711 CE, Islam had expanded throughout North Africa, conquering all of the Maghreb and even the Iberian Peninsula of Europe, before finally being stopped in its tracks partway into the Frankish kingdom. Meanwhile, in Northeast Africa, Egypt was conquered just 10 years after Muhammad's death in the year 642 CE, but these conquerors never advanced further than the Nubian kingdom of Makuria. Historically, the Nubian kingdoms were regarded as the finest archers in the world, with a force of just 10,000 archers and horsemen decisively defeating 20,000 Arab warriors from the Rashidun Caliphate. Throughout the Middle Ages, Islam continued to expand far and wide, making its way all the way to India, China, and Indonesia. The Sahara Desert, on the other hand, acted as a barrier to the spread of Islam to sub-Saharan Africa, with its introductions to the region being relatively slow as a result of it. The Swahili Coast and the Western Sudan were the only parts of sub-Saharan Africa to adopt Islam on a sizable scale, with religion coming to a screeching halt in the West African Forest Zone, where the majority of the people in this region continued to practice indigenous traditions well into the colonial era. Prior to the foundation of the Islamic faith, sub-Saharan Africa hosted several indigenous civilizations that would later convert to Islam, such as Wagadu or Ghana, the Kingdom of Gao, the Kingdom of Kanem, and the Hausa kingdoms. However, several others continued on without ever converting and even competing with their neighboring Islamic states such as the kingdoms of Edo or Benin, Mosi, Oyo, and the Ashanti. West Africa also hosted several ancient civilizations that predate the formation or influence of Islam, such as the Kintampo complex of what is now the modern-day country of Ghana, the Bira culture along the Niger River, the Nok civilization of Nigeria, the Sao civilization of Lake Chad, and the Tambuze complex of the western Niger Bend. These archaeological sites offer numerous examples of highly organized, powerful, and urbanized Iron Age centers that formed independently on the continent prior to Islamic influence. Ghana is generally accepted as West Africa's oldest known empire, which dates back to around 300 CE and perhaps as early as 100 CE, or approximately 300 to 500 years prior to the birth of Muhammad. The East African coast also hosts a collection of small trading ports that date back to at least the year 200 CE, and are known to have traded with lands as far away as China on indigenous vessels known as Mtepe, a type of ship completely unique to the Bantu peoples of East Africa, and primarily manufactured in the Lamu Islands off the coast of what is now Kenya. Unlike the Islamic conquest of Maghreb, which was a largely swift and violent movement that took place in the span of only a century or so, Islam in sub-Saharan Africa was a relatively slow and peaceful process that gradually took place over a few centuries after the advent of the camel saddle. Islam began spreading by sea across the East African coast in the 8th century CE, with the oldest confirmed mosque in the region being excavated on what is now Pate Island, Kenya, and dating back to the year 800 CE. Bolstered by the strong maritime traditions of the East African peoples, Islam quickly spread over a large expanse of the East African coast, fueled by the thriving trade economy that already existed in the region. Islam served as a tool to solidify trade relations among these diverse peoples, creating the largest maritime trade network in the entire world at the time. Trading with fellow Muslims was always good practice, as it could be used as a tool to strengthen the trust, unity, and economic relations between otherwise very different peoples. It also ensured the dissemination of ideas, trade goods, architectural traditions, and technology across a very vast area. This unity was so strong that an entirely new group developed along the East African coast known as Swahili. The language of these people is undeniably Bantu in origin, but also shares a plethora of loanwords and cultural practices with Arabic and even Hindi peoples of India. For the next few centuries, relatively peaceful conversion transpired among several independent African city-states, with several large, influential, and independent city-states developing along the coast such as Sofala, Mombasa, and Malindi, which were all self-governing polities ruled by Bantu people, until they were invaded by the Portuguese in the 15th and 16th centuries, and then eventually fell under the rule of the Omani Sultanate after they successfully defeated the Portuguese in the 17th century. Similar to their East African counterparts, West Africans likely adopted Islam as a means of solidifying economic relations with their northern trade partners. Most of the region's most powerful states such as Mali, Gao or Songhai, and Kanem adopted Islam around the 11th and 12th centuries, with other kingdoms like those of the Hausa adopting it several centuries later. This conversion brought about significant cultural changes in the states within the region, including the introduction of the Arabic writing system, a foundational change in formerly illiterate societies. This also greatly strengthened sub-Saharan Africa's contact with Eurasia for years to come, as Arabic, Berber, and Sudanic peoples alike all had fellow Muslim trade partners, if you will, awaiting them on the other side of the desert. Despite this largely peaceful and willing conversion of sub-Saharan African peoples, it remained something almost exclusive to the elite and noble classes of West Africa, while the common folk largely retained traditional African religions. Oftentimes, Islam would even be blended with local religions. In comparison to the Islam of Arabia and North Africa, as mentioned before, the West African or Sudanic variety was a relatively tolerant form that in most cases allowed for its subjects to continue on with their indigenous customs and traditions with little to no consequences. Women, for example, could attain high positions in society, a stark comparison to Islamic communities elsewhere. There was, however, a dark side. As with other pagan peoples that were conquered or ruled over by Muslim elites, those who were adherents to Islam were generally exempt from being enslaved and allowed several other privileges over their non-Islamic counterparts. Consequentially, this provided a greater incentive for neighboring states to convert without being directly extorted into doing so. This led to the largest slave trade in recorded history, even dwarfing the transatlantic slave trade, strictly in regards to the quantity of slaves alone. Facts like these often upset local rulers and sometimes led to full-on anti-Islamic movements, or basically jihads or crusades, but led by non-Muslim states, to fight off the presence and influence of Islam. The Empire of Ghana, or Wagadu, traded with Muslim Berbers peacefully for centuries, while still retaining their traditional religions. The king was known to be very friendly towards Muslims, and even had entire sections of the capital allocated to accommodate them, featuring stone dwellings. However, as many rivaling states became more and more disgruntled with economic and political dominance of Wagadu, many wars ensued, and eventually, the Islamic Almoravid dynasty of Morocco made an alliance with the neighboring kingdom of Takrur, another Islamic African state, to take over Ghana and impose the Islamic religion. This conquest, however, was very short-lived and complicated, only lasting 11 years before the Almoravids were pushed away, followed by Ghana's collapse into several smaller kingdoms. Roughly a century later, another pagan kingdom emerged to replace Ghana as the dominant state of the region, with its ruler Samaru Kante having a strong distaste for Islam. He rapidly and relentlessly expanded his empire in an attempt to take over all of Ghana's former holdings. However, surrounded by Islamic neighbors, and holding a reputation for being an overall very cruel leader, northern trade networks with Muslim Berbers were relocated to new centers, and eventually he was defeated by a federation of Mande states in the Battle of Krina in the year 1235. This led to the formation of the Islamic Empire of Mali. Over the next several centuries, this region would see the rise and fall of several other Islamic empires in the Sahel that grew wealthy in the trade of enslaved pagans, gold, and local crops. This was interrupted after the Saudi dynasty of Morocco defeated the Songhai Empire after decades of battles. West Africa then disintegrated into several smaller kingdoms, one of which was known as the Segu or Bambara. Like the aforementioned Soso Empire, this small kingdom strongly opposed Islamic presence. Not only did they grow to become one of the largest empires in the region, but they also defeated the Moroccan Pashas and forced them to pay tribute, same gun-wielding Pashas that defeated the Songhai Empire. A few decades later, they laid siege to what remained of the Mali Empire and conquered them as well. The last major conflict between Islamic empires and traditional ones was in the 19th century. The Islamic Fulani led a jihad in West Africa, conquering not just traditional peoples, but also the already Islamic Hausa kingdoms, with the objective to convert them to a more pure version of the religion. They held sway to all of Hausa land and surrounding areas until the early 20th century, when they were conquered and assimilated into French West Africa. Today, 47% of all African people are Muslims, accounting for 1/4 of the world's entire Muslim population. It remains an important part of the lives of millions of diverse African cultures and ethnic identities, despite its origins in West Asia 1500 years ago. Despite the plethora of Arabic cultural influences that Islam has brought to Africa, it is a religion that is practiced by African people and their cultural influences in a manner no different than Christianity in Europe. Traditional practices still run deep within African communities and are loudly and proudly flaunted throughout the continent, even in spite of Islam and more recently, Christian influences. Much of what we know about Africa's past comes from the written records of Islamic peoples in and out of Africa, and to present, over 700,000 Islamic manuscripts written in Arabic remain in Timbuktu that could possibly rewrite the history of West Africa. Also, as I mentioned at the beginning, this video was requested by a patron, and if you'd like to make an awesome request of your own, you can do so by becoming a patron. Your pledge directly supports the channel and contributes towards the betterment of my content and the African history community as a whole. Thanks for watching, guys, and always remember, we don't come from nothing.